A writer, Khadija Shehu Babali, describes migration as movement from one point to another, but such movement, whether regular or irregular, in tune with modern-day balance, must be focused and purposeful. Recent global events has redefined the concept of migration in terms of the diasporic nature of the coronavirus disease, and Nigeria is no exception. One might want to disagree since coronavirus itself is not a person, and irregular migration, according to the International Organization for Migration, is a movement of persons that take place outside the laws, regulations, or international agreements governing the entry into or exit from states of origin, transit, or destination. However, you'll agree that right from the outbreak of the coronavirus disease in Wuhan, China, Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, alongside major stakeholders, have contributed a lot in curbing this pandemic, especially as it affects Nigerians trapped in the affected countries. Now, COVID-19 has become not only a huge health crisis, but a globalization and global governance challenge. It has raised the question of how the world should organize itself against the threat of pandemics, but it also has implications for how globalization is perceived and what that perception means for the future of international cooperation. The increase of the interconnectedness have opened up the world to massive cross-border flows of goods, services, money, ideas, data, and people. While globalization is not new, the sheer scale and scope of the current version has made the world unprecedentedly interdependent and thus fragile. My guest on the program is an expert in diplomacy and international relations. Dr. Mukhtar IMAM is a consultant and also lecturer at the Base University Abuja, Nigeria. Dr. Mukhtar IMAM. Globalization and global governance challenge occasioned by COVID-19 is the focus of diplomatic ties today. Stay with us after this time out. Well, Dr. Imam, always a pleasure having you on Diplomatic Ties.
The pleasure is mine.
Well, quite unfortunate that it has happened. It started like a joke, but look at where we are. So, can you give me in perspective the globalization challenge in terms of governance globally of COVID-19?
Well, thank you very much. COVID-19, as we know it today, is a pandemic, as has been declared and described by the World Health Organization. The body started with the responsibility of carrying that task. Of course, every epidemic and pandemic, as we have seen for millennia, because apparently for millennia, there have been several epidemics and pandemics that have threatened to obliterate human existence. But as a result of the nature of human resilience, we have been able to overcome most, if not all, of these challenges significantly. It does have a toll on every facet of life. That's the thing about a crisis. An epidemic, whether it is a natural disaster or a man-made, a natural hazard or a man-made disaster, it definitely will have a toll on all facets of life, including governance as well, and when we talk about governance, we're not just talking about governance at the domestic level, not just local governance or local government. It affects governance at the domestic and at the international level. So basically, it's safe to say that this epidemic or pandemic is scourge that is threatening our collective responsiveness as a community, as a global community, and within that community also threatening the existing status quo in terms of governance structure, in terms of economic structure, in terms of social structure, and so on and so forth. So yes, this pandemic is a threat, and the world is grappling with it. We see the spread, and it is rising day in, day out. Just a few hours ago, the death toll has risen to nearly 7,500 people. It's something that is worrisome, and governments all around the world are trying everything within their powers to see that they try to curtail the situation.
So will this call for some way of saying, let's review or redefine globalization?
Of course, it certainly will. You see, this is a watershed in our history what is happening now is definitely going to go down in history as something that has twisted the very fabric of nature. Because here we are in a situation where we're grappling with a hazard that we did not prepare for. Nature has brought this before us. Perhaps some people might argue that it is a man-made disaster, but the blame game is not where we should focus on at the moment. So yes, it's going to have a toll on what happens. It's going to redefine history. It's going to be a part of our future going further. Decades from now, millennia from now, it will be talked about, because definitely this has shaped the global community. This has shaped globalization and the perception of globalization. This has shaped globalism. It is shaping multilateralism. It is testing, as a matter of fact, multilateralism. It is testing our collective effort or strength in tackling these kind of challenges. We've said over and over again, that as a matter of fact, things like the Second World War, for example, from after the Second World War, the world has never experienced a scourge of this nature. So yes, this is something that is here to reshape events, to be able to, so that we as humans will be able to look at this issue and understand where we're coming from and where we should be going to. Because after the Second World War, as a matter of fact, one of the reasons that have not that has helped to avert a third world war. There are three reasons, in my view, that led to the First World War, which is ebullient militarism, aggressive nationalism, and of course, insatiable imperialism, right? All of these are tied to issues around trying to shrink the world into smaller spheres, people seeking newer markets, movement of goods and services and humans. This is what all of this is about. Now, when you look at the other hand, you will realize that three reasons have also helped to avert the rise, if you like, of a third world war. One of them is what is called the mutual assured destruction. There's also the nuclear utilization target selection. But the most important, and what relates to what we're talking about here, is the growing interdependence amongst individuals and states within the international system. And that is where globalization basically comes into. Now, for a scourge of this nature to come and put a spanner in the wheel of what has been transcending, flowing with ease, it means it's definitely going to have an effect on how we view globalization and, of course, globalism over time.
Beautiful. Now, still on the same perspective,
yes,
globalization, global competitiveness. For instance, let's say the world's money is domiciled in the United States.
Precisely.
Going to the World Bank right now.
Yes.
The hub of global manufacturing is in China. And these two extremes, they are major, what we call risk areas.
Yes, yes.
How do we handle this after now? Because whether we like it or not, I believe the world with all the innovation, like a few days ago, United States had commissioned that vaccines will be out to cure this. If we surmount this, how do we handle this in case such a development comes up again?
Well, the thing about pandemics or epidemic is that it doesn't give you warnings. But then, of course, there are signs there that would require you taking certain proactive measures to be able to cope some of these challenges. You were talking about manufacture and all of that. You see, the thing is, we have an oligarchic, if you like, financial international monopolistic structure in the United States, which is what has kept the economy of the United States afloat after the Second World War, the petrodollar. So basically it has held, the universal acceptability of the dollar has basically held economies to ransom, and that's the reason why the United States continues to play that big brother posture. Of course, you find manufacturing is slowing down in China. Virtually all facets of economy, from the capital market, which is the money market, which we've just talked about in the United States. You look at the Dow, for example, it has dropped and is dropping significantly. You look at the stock market, bulls and bonds and shares and all of that are dropping significantly. All sectors are being hit, from the entertainment industry. The movie sector is dropping significantly. You will find that up to the manufacturing sector, China is being hit for the first time in the history of the world. We're seeing a sharp drop and decline in virtually all facets of the economy, including the Brent crude oil as well. It has just dropped, just today, it has dropped to about $21 per barrel. So yes, what we're faced with today is having a toll on economy, it's having a toll on manufacture, it's having a toll on virtually everything.
Ships, religion.
Of course, it's also having a toll on religion. I was going to go to the religious and social aspect after now. So you see, it is having a toll on humans, on migration, and every facet of life. Harbors are holding on to ships, and imports and exports are dropping significantly. So this is going to have a toll, a direct toll on the lot of the lives of ordinary people all around the world. Now, one thing that we must focus on is that this should be an eye-opener for countries, particularly in the developing climes, to understand that we need to be put in place proactive measures. For example, when the current administration, which we must give kudos to for its effort in its diversification drive, was trying to talk about diversification and the need to saving culture, the need to create an economy that can feed itself. You know, there was a whole lot of backlash and flag waving and all of that. Now, this is what we were talking about. You know, so there's the need for government all across board to be proactive, because, like you rightly mentioned, at the end of this, we should see a world that should come out better. Right? A world that we faced the Second World War. Collectively, we were able to put our humanness first, our humanity first, and we're able to pull out of it. And we had at least the United Nations. It has not been all sufficient in all of its mandates, which, and reasons, statutory reasons for which it was established, but it has been able to curb major conflicts and wars around the world. So we should see a post-COVID-19 international world order that we will be proud of. One that we will be able to look back and say we were faced with another pandemic, yet we were able to collectively pull out of this. And ways to go about this is that we need to see, for advocates of capitalism and those who tend to promote the goodness within the capitalist nature, I think this is an opportunity for them to prove themselves, because like we were talking about earlier, a vaccine that is yet to be produced, hopefully we might see this vaccine being produced sometime next year. Already a price tag is being put on this vaccine. And this is all as a result of the kind of oligarchic and monopolistic structure we have within the international system. We're talking about $44 as profit to low-income economies. I think that is insensitive for a plight that is threatening our collective humanity. I don't think that is something that capitalists or big farmers should begin to consider at this point in time. This is a time where we need to come together. This is a time where multilateralism is being tested yet again. And so there's the need for governments to come together. All the blame game and calling the virus a China virus is not just going to help anybody. This is a time where we need to have concerted effort to be able to say, how do we create awareness? How do we empower the scientific community? This is not a time for rumor mongering. This is not a time for panic, which panic, by the way, is a part of human nature. But we need to, as much as we can, assuage these tensions. This is a time where we need to return back to the drawing board and look at preferences and priority areas. What exactly are we budgeting resources for? How are these monies going to be spent? You look at the projection which the current administration made in its 10 trillion naira very ambitious budget. It was pegged at $57 per barrel. And within the space of a few days, look what has happened, which is not something that was planned for. So there's a need for all of these things to be put into consideration.
Let's narrow down to Africa, looking specifically at remediation and mitigation efforts. Okay. Would you say Africa has done well so far, as much as we still have isolated cases here and there?
Well, I think, for one, that's a perception issue, and secondly, it's a subjective question. The reality is this, that as far as this scourge is concerned and any other crisis situation, there's the need to say there's room for more. Yes, is the government doing well enough? I think the government is doing well enough within what resources it possesses, within the time frame it has to tackle this crisis. This is a pandemic that perhaps we have had, yes, like I said in the beginning, for millennia, the human race has been tested by different epidemics and pandemics. But this pandemic has its uniqueness. It has its peculiarity. And there isn't a manual book it has come with to governments to say this is how you should tackle this situation. But there are certain similitudes, there are certain similarities, there are certain indices that share certain commonalities with pandemics we've had in the past before. So government needs to do more. Yes, the government is doing fairly well enough. We're faced with a crisis of, we've just dragged ourselves out of a recession. That is, if we're out of the recession. And here we are being faced with this kind of situation in an economy that still seems monolithic in nature. Because the truth is we have not diversified well enough, right? So yes, government is doing fairly well, but this is the time to return back, like I said, to the drawing board. 8.3 billion is not sufficient resources, but in the face of the kind of situation and economy we have presently in Africa, what more do you expect the government to do? The resources are not readily available for government to begin to say, well, dipping our hands into. The foreign reserve is dropping sharply. The excess crude account is not even being talked about. The sovereign wealth fund is dropping significantly. So you see that all of these are issues that requires concerted effort, long-term planning, so that in the event of such an issue, we have a shock absorber. When issues like this come up, that's when we begin to run helter-skelter and say, let's diversify. Diversification is cost-effective. I mean, it's capital-intensive. For any economy that hopes to diversify, you need to look at areas that you will cut from to be able to plunge resources into diversification. For example, the cost of governance is too high in Africa. Ours is one of the most expensive democracies in the world. We need to return back and look at how we will cut some of these funds, throw them into areas such as this one we're talking about. Was it not just a couple of weeks ago, the National Congress was shouting about how Prado Jeeps is what they should get rather than Toyota Camry of 2018? You know, for what? For their statutory responsibility, oversight function. You say, well, they need to realize that they did not vote for us. We voted for them. And they are there to serve the people, right? So this is the time for that, this sort of things. And then secondly, like I was trying to talk about earlier, you see, this is not a time for speculation. This is a time for scientific reasoning. The government needs to do a lot more. I'm really elated with what the Northwest governors did under the auspices of the Kaduna State government. It's a welcome development, and these are the sort of proactive measures we should begin to see. And I think we were ripe enough. We've come to that stage where government also needs to begin to criminalize certain acts, because this is a time where you see prophets of doom and spiritualists to go about telling people that they can bathe with salt and water, and they have special water and things like that will heal them. Now, this is not a time for things like that, and government needs to begin to criminalize such acts so that we will deter people from prying on the gullibility of their adherents or followers. This is not a time for all of these things.
So how do we juxtapose tourism,
yes,
religion, social interaction, linked with the terms we have heard now, economic activities, social distancing, and now how do we juxtapose all this?
Well, the truth is this.
In view of the development
yes,
now.
Thank you very much. In view of the current situation at hand that we did not project for, we did not plan for, that is in all rationality, not necessarily man-made. Yes, perhaps by accident, certain human activities or interactions or encounters led to the situation we're faced with. But this is a viral disease. This is real. We need to understand that. And so in the face of such crisis, steps that would have been taken ab initio were perhaps handled with kids' gloves. And that's the reason why this escalated to the level which it has gotten to at present. I understand that as a people were very emotional towards our religion. I understand that as a people we like to have social gatherings and all of that. I understand that as a people we require some level of tourism to be able to go around the world and see what the world holds. But when you're faced with a crisis situation, this is a crisis situation. Where you find yourself faced with drastic situations, you must understand that drastic measures must be taken to be able to safeguard yourself as a human being first, before even talking about the collective. And it is by so doing that the collective can overcome whatever crisis situation that we're faced with. And hence, there is the need to understand that the measures have to be put in place. As individuals, we must first of all check ourselves and say, how very committed are we to salvaging the situation, and what are the things that we need to do? We must make sacrifices first and foremost. And how do we sacrifice? In the face of issues such as religious gatherings and spirituality, we must understand that the issue at hand is a human phenomenon. There is everything spiritual about human existence, but we must also understand that science and religion are not fighting. Science is only the younger brother of religion.
You have scratched social distancing, but looking at standing orders in handling official matters, we now have cases where people are restricted. Academics like you now do lectures in some climb via video conferencing and what have you. What implication with all this?
Well, in the face of crisis, you must improvise.
Okay.
Right? And that's exactly what governments and all groups and individuals need to understand. It's very tasky, it's very challenging. It's something that seems very strange and alien to us because we've always been acclimatized with the norm. we know the usual. We just walk into the classes and do all of that. So, but yes, there are takeaways from this. It comes with a lot of negativities, like with the virus in itself, but there are certain positives as well that should be taken away from this. Because you see, the reality is, part of the things that have led Africa to the situation it is today, from the early, when you look at the early global evolution of man and history, you will come to realize that we have always had it easy. Our climate is part of the problems why we have this lukewarm attitude. Lethargy is part of the biggest problem of Africa and Africans. And the reason why lethargy exists is because we have things easy. We have not had natural hazards and earthquakes and tsunamis and things like that. Aha, exactly. When you go to Netherlands and you ask the people in the Dutch part of the world, you will understand why they have to become proactive. When you go to Britain and ask the people in Britain, they will tell you, when you look at the history of Britain, for example, you will understand why they have to be dogged, why they have to be resilient, because they have had series and sequences of attacks from nature. Right? We have not had that here. And that's the reason why this lukewarm attitude is always with us. That's the reason why sickle cell is ravaging our communities, because of the laziness of our forefathers. That's the truth. So basically, this is an opportunity for us to understand that challenges is not just about one individual. And that's the reason why I say multilateralism is very, very important. But while looking at multilateralism, consistently in the circle of the existing status quo of multilateralism, it has always been a dependency kind of relationship. This is a time for us to also wake up and begin to ask ourselves, China is facing its own challenge now. We're not going to start running cap in hand to China. We cannot run cap in hand to Germany. We will not run cap in hand to the United States. So this is the time for us to understand that we need to return back to the drawing board. Wake ourselves up to the realization that this is just one pandemic, and look where it has pushed us to, the corner. Imagine if we consistently, God forbid, have this kind of situations over time. What then do we do? How do we survive? So yes, that it has happened is a very good opportunity for us to tap into and see how we can work on our areas of strength and strengthen ourselves better, look at areas of weaknesses and see where we haven't done well enough, and see where the opportunities lie in this situation and tap into it. And of course, we will be able to tackle the threats that is inherent in this situation.
With the economic and social challenges this has created, let's look at it from the continental perspective: Africa, Asia, the Americas, the United Kingdom. In all this, it looks as though somehow, like you've said, Africa is not as hit as it is from other continents. Yes. By implication, at the end of it, let's look at a post-COVID-19 era.
Yes.
What do you project?
Well, I see us coming out stronger from this. I see us, like we did in the period of the First and Second World War. Like I said earlier, we were able to come out of that period, which, by the way, was a man-made disaster. We were able to come out of that period stronger, and we have been able to establish institutions around the world that have helped to at least assuage, some of the tensions that the world was grappling with at that time. I see at the continental level, at regional level, at subcontinental level, and on the global level, I see us as a human species, as a collective, coming out of this stronger. The post-COVID-19 international world order will be a better world, because we would have learned a lot of lessons from this. But having said that, having painted that very bright picture, there's a whole lot of responsibility on our hands at this material time. On our hands either as individuals, on our hands either as groups, on our hands either as religious leaders or spiritual leaders or traditional institutions or elected government officials. We have a task.
Professional groupings too.
Of course, all of us. So there's the need for us to all come together as a collective. The media is also very, very instrumental in this. As you know, perception is key in everything. Domestic politics, international politics, perception. And what brings the perception out there is the media. So a whole lot of task has to be done, a whole lot of responsibility. Creating panic and fear is not very helpful at this material time. The scientific community is doing everything that it can to see that we find the way out of this situation. While that is going on, we must take preemptive measures. We must be proactive. We must try as much as we can to see that we heed to some of the warnings that have been put in place, to some of the measures that have been talked about, to be able to save ourselves first, and of course to be able to save ourselves as a collective.
Dr. Mukhtar, IMAM, it's always a pleasure talking with you. What next? We expect in a matter of weeks, maybe months or days, a post-COVID-19 era. And like my guest has said, we should learn from there and move on. Globalization cannot be defeated. The world will really remain a better place. That's it on Diplomatic Ties for this week. Thanks for watching.